meeting of the James City County Board of Supervisors to order for the purpose of a business meeting. Mr. Stevens, please call the roll.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Here.
Mr. Hippel?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
Ms. Sadler?
Here.
Mr. McGlennon?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. We have no presentations this afternoon, but we have a full consent calendar, and the consent calendar today includes appropriation of $100,000 from the American Rescue Plan Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund Program. We have authorization for a full-time purchasing position and use of American Rescue Plan funds, consideration of the James City County Natural and Cultural Assets Plan, contract award of $515,195 for construction services for the Clara Bird Baker Safe Routes to School Sidewalk Project, a contract award of $220,234.66 for roll-off truck. We have a grant award of $32,478 for Bulletproof Vest Partnership. We have a grant award of $183,260 for Commonwealth Attorney Victims Witness Assistance Program. We have a grant award of $11,818 for fiscal year 2022 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant. Grant award of $2,000 for Virginia Capital Trail Foundation's grant. Grant award of $313,963 for Virginia Fire Program Fund. Hiring incentive adjustments for county personnel, and minutes adoptions for 2 of our recent meetings. Anybody wish to pull any of these items?
I don't wish to pull any of these items, but I just wanted to make a comment that when I was reading through each of them, just a thank you to everyone in the county, that all of the staff that applied for these different grants, and the good use that they'll be going to. And with that, I'd move adoption of the consent calendar.
And I think we want to also extend our thanks to the federal and state governments for providing these grant opportunities for us. Certainly helps a great deal, especially in public safety. Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlennon?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, the consent calendar is adopted. We now have board discussions, and the first discussion item is fiscal updates, and Sharon McCarthy will be making a presentation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. Excuse me. This afternoon, I'll provide updates on the county's finances for fiscal year 2022, which ended on June 30th, 2022, as well as the first quarter of fiscal year 2023, which ended on September 30th. Just as a reminder, these figures do not include any of our COVID relief funding, specifically ARPA. The ARPA funds, as you know, was really set aside in a separate fund for special projects and some capital projects, and not part of our ongoing operations. Starting with the general fund's revenue, as noted, these figures are still considered preliminary. We are in the midst of our year-end financial audit. We expect that to be completed in the next month or so and presented to the board at your December meeting. Here we presented a comparison of the 22 actual revenue to the budget, as well as a comparison of actual 22 revenue to last year, 2021 revenue. General property taxes, of course, is our largest revenue source. It represents about 2/3 of our overall revenue. It includes real estate and personal property taxes. And most of the increase here is related to the personal property taxes, mainly for used cars, and what we saw with the values of those cars increasing during calendar year 2021. This is the area that the board adopted to provide some taxpayer relief for the June bills by reducing that assessment from 100% of assessed value to 75% of assessed value. And the other local taxes, you can see here, this is where our economic recovery is being shown, primarily in our sales, meals, and lodging taxes. We also had a new tax in fiscal year 2022. That was our cigarette tax, and that began in the fall of last year, about this time last year. The increase in the use of money and property is primarily attributable to the rent that we're now receiving on the courthouse properties. That rent was not in the original budget. We did not know about it at that time, but once we purchased that property and we became the landlords, we did see an increase in our rental income. The decrease in the state and federal category, hopefully this will be the last time you hear me say this, but that sales tax for education was still in the 2021 actual revenues. And again, that is no longer coming to the county. That now is being deposited directly with the school division. The charges for services also began its economic recovery primarily through our Parks and Rec programs, which we saw those programs resurrect, and we also saw participation come back to the pre-pandemic levels. Our miscellaneous and transfers category, most of that reflects the sale of property, which is not an ongoing operational type revenue, but we did sell some property and receive some proceeds in fiscal year 2022. And then our fund balance category, this is an area that will vary year to year depending on what happens during the year that may cause a need to dip into our fund balance. For 2022, the uses included paying for our outstanding purchase orders from the previous year. That was about $1.5 million. We also had budgeted a use of our fund balance for the fiscal year 2022 capital program. That was about $6.4 million. We purchased the courthouse properties. That was about $7 million. We had support for the school year-end spending plan of about $6.4 million. And then we also had the advanced purchase of a fire pumper of about $800,000. That was included in the plan for 2023, but we purchased it a couple months early so that we could avoid a significant price increase in that fire truck. Turning to the expenditure side, and again, these figures are based on preliminary unaudited figures. As you can see, all the departments did finish the year under budget. I did want to draw attention to public safety. That is an area that we typically see a higher level of savings. However, in fiscal year 2022, we did see some unusual challenges, and they were on our watch list for most of the last quarter of 2022. Police and fire, of course, were struggling with a number of vacancies, and as a result of that, we did see a spike in their overtime for the last few months. We also saw record high fuel prices, and those fuel prices were not included at the time we were doing the budget development for fiscal year 2022. Overall, they were still able to come under budget by about 1%. I also wanted to note the savings that's in financial administration. 1.3 million of that is attributable to our health claims. We were able to come in under budget when we look at what we paid out in claims versus what we collected from the employer and the employee shares. We did have savings of about $1.3 million. That goes to a set-aside reserve for the use of future payments for claims. And then the savings in the school division was due to a planned borrowing that was delayed due to the economic uncertainty and the delay of our capital program as we recovered. So quick recap, as you see here, again, revenue came in about $243 million. Expenditures was about $219 million. That created an overall year-end surplus of almost $24 million. Some of that $24 million was already spoken for. I mentioned the $1.3 million in financial admin that was savings from health claims. That again goes to a separate reserve, not available for normal spending. We also have set aside future debt service payments of about $1.8 million, capital projects in 23 of $4.1, and then the addition to our overall unassigned fund balance is where the difference resides of about $16.7 million. As you know, our fiscal policies require that we maintain an unassigned fund balance that equates to or exceeds 15% of our overall general governmental expenditures. Prior to 2023, our policy had been 12%. So when we increase that from 12% to 15%, that 3% means we have to have more dollars set aside. It's about a $7 million difference. So at the end of fiscal year 2022, the requirement at 15% would be about $39 million as an unreserved balance. To date, our total balance is $64 million. So we're sitting at about 25%, which is 10% above the fiscal policy of 15%. So it's a very healthy reserve. Since the pandemic started, we have used some of our fund balance for expenditures that were cut from the budget due to the uncertainty of the pandemic and its impacts, and just for other one-time uses as those needs arose. We avoided using fund balance for operational cost, and that's because that would naturally create a budget imbalance. We would be spending money that we didn't know how we would cover in the future since we hadn't identified an ongoing funding source. I did want to mention in recent years, and due to the uncertainty of the pandemic, you all have been very conservative in your budgeting, and we've curtailed spending quite a bit. In fiscal year 2023, we have adjusted the budget accordingly. We are now back to more of the pre-pandemic levels, so we don't expect this type of year-end surplus to continue. This also means that we need to be strategic about the use of our fund balance to help us weather those future storms, literally and figuratively. On the revenue side, moving on to fiscal year 2023, our current year, presented here is the annual budget, so that's your full 12 months, 3 months of actual revenue, again covering that July through September timeframe. And again, overall, we continue to see a recovery in our revenues. A couple of items to note, once again in the miscellaneous and transfers, that $1.3 million was due to another property sale. It was a piece of property in the Greenmount area of the county that was sold. And then for fiscal year 2022, we have set aside about $1.8 million of our fund balance for outstanding purchase orders at the end of fiscal year 2022. It's a little higher than what we would normally see. We're normally around $1 million to $1.5 million. That is reflective of the supply chain issues that we're seeing. We're purchasing items, but it was taking longer to get them. And then strategically, we did purchase some items to take advantage of some discounted pricing before, again, prices rose again. Switching gears to the spending side of the budget, and again, looking at the current fiscal year, same time period. If all the expenses came in evenly, you'd expect us to be at about 25% or about 1/4 through the year. Overall, we're at about 31%, but that last category, which includes your contributions to other agencies and our transfers, is skewing that percentage. You can see it's at 65%, and I'll talk about the reasons for that in just a minute. This line graph shows you where we would be at 25%. The blue line shows us where our departments are actual for the first quarter of the year. For all the areas that are above budget, they're for all the reasons we've talked about in the past. For example, in financial management, we're required to pay our insurance premium in full at the beginning of the year. Same holds true for IT. A lot of their maintenance and software contracts are due in the beginning of the year. Transfers, contributions, where we're transferring funds, let's say for our capital improvement program, we do all of those transfers in July. So it trends high the first part of the year, and then it starts to normalize as more time goes on. Also, all of the payments that we make to our nonprofit entities, we make all of those payments in July as well, which also makes that number a little bit higher. In addition, we issue a significant number of purchase orders at the beginning of the year. And so when we issue a purchase order, it deducts from the budget right away, but the actual payment for those expenditures will occur throughout the year. So again, that would cause us to skew a little higher. We do have two areas that we are watching. The first one is the courts. As you can see, it's at 27%. All of those things that I mentioned that can skew that percentage don't apply to this area, so it drew our attention to it. And through conversations with the courts and the judges specifically, this is really due to the backlog in the juror cases through the pandemic. As you know, those cases were put on hold, and that did create quite a significant backlog. They are back and running again, and they're making tremendous effort against that backlog. And because of that, we're seeing a record high number of payments to juries. So this is an area we're going to have to keep an eye on and potentially make some adjustments if it continues to trend high. In public safety, we're also keeping an eye on that. We're still looking to see what's going to happen with fuel. That primarily affects police and fire the most in the county. And then also overtime. As you know, we continue to struggle with some personnel shortages in those areas. And so we are still seeing an uptick in overtime. So in closing, it's definitely been a few interesting years, both during the pandemic and of course as we recover. I will say in my career, we're seeing unusual times. It's very difficult to predict where we're going to be, even from one day to the next. We're in very volatile times. We've seen a lot of economic ups and downs, some recoveries, and then going back the other way. We're also keeping a very close eye on the interest rate market as we talk about future budgets and capital projects, what makes sense to pay cash versus borrowing. And then like any others, as you've heard several times now, we continue to challenge with some staff shortages and the impacts that that's having on the budget as well. We are still having some supply chain issues. That is getting better. It's taking longer to get things still. We're also still seeing that high cost of construction as one of our challenges as well. And that concludes my remarks. Happy to respond any questions, comments you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCarthy. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I have one. The money that goes directly to school that used to come to us now goes directly to school. Has there been any decrease in the amount the school receives? Or is it, I didn't see anything in there that would show any change in that. And I was just wondering, is there a decrease, or is it still tracking, on a general higher as each year as we go?
Their sales tax for education, it's my understanding they're also trending higher than they have in years past. That's just been a nationwide trend that we're seeing. I will say in some of the local economic region updates that I've attended, they are cautioning us that that is starting to flatline now, particularly with what's going on with inflation. But that has been an ongoing area that's been higher for them. Their CFO is here and can speak to that more specifically.
Yeah, I just know if it goes down, we're gonna cover that in the end. I just was curious is that level, because it always came through us, so you would kind of see it. But right now we don't, I know y'all see it, but we don't see it to see if it's going down and what may change as far as our costs in the future.
I know that did help contribute to their year-end surplus, particularly at the end of 2021. They were conservative like we were. And then we just didn't predict sales tax to come in above what it had even in previous years. I do believe they've uprighted their budget as well, sort of like we have, to adjust for most of that. Obviously, the sales tax on internet procurement has also helped.
Okay, yeah, just want to make sure we didn't get a shortfall for them to, keep them where they need to be as well. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions or comments?
No, just thank you very much. Very good report.
Absolutely.
I just had one question, Ms. McCarthy, about the total for the cigarette tax receipts during the year.
Yes, so we budgeted about $600,000. For the first quarter, we had collected about $150,000. So if that continues, we would be right at that $600,000.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's a very healthy plan, and I think your approach is very much called for in the time of economic uncertainty. So,
Thank you.
thanks. And now you have another presentation, I think, is that right? This is the school's fiscal year 2022 year-end spending plan.
Thank you, Chairman. At a
Welcome
meeting at a meeting on September 20th, the Williamsburg-James City County School Board adopted a spending plan for fiscal year 2022 year-end funds totaling $5.4 million. The school division estimates that the total year-end surplus will be $6 million. The remaining $600,000 will be returned to the funding localities for future capital improvement plan projects. The county share of the total local spending for fiscal year 2022 was 90.32%, and as a result, about $5.4 million would be returned to the county. The spending plan adopted by the Williamsburg-James City County School Board includes the following: school bus replacements of $850,000, War Hill Gym and Emergency Shelter of about $1.6 million, safety and security enhancements of $2.4 million, and then capital improvement plan projects, which are actually in your fiscal year 2023 CIP, of about $600,000. Additional documentation has been provided by the school division regarding their request, And the resolution, if adopted, approves the school board's requested spending plan and appropriates the funding in the county's budget to be used for the above intended purposes. Members of the school division are here with us this afternoon as well.
Do you have any questions or comments? I wonder if we could just spend a minute talking about the school bus item in this, just so that we understand our future plans for funding of that request, which we know will be an annual request coming from schools. This year, we're dealing with it in terms of end-of-year expenditures, but I think we're expecting in the future for that to be part of the operating budget.
That's correct. Ms. Ewan and myself have had quite a few conversations along with the CFO at this city about the best approach for school bus replacements. They're large ticket items, and they're very similar to our plan and how we replace our medic units and our fire trucks, which is part of our CIP, so we don't have the volatility in our operating budget, and so that it is a planned replacement. And so the plan going forward would be that that would be submitted by the school division as part of their capital improvement program.
Do you have any other questions or concerns?
Mr. Chair, if I could mention one other thing, this is, or should be, the last year-end spending plan that you see. The new contract we have with the city talks about how we'll take the year-end money. We would still set it aside for the school division, but it would be incorporated more in your budget process, which should help on the school bus funding issue as well. Unless there's something really unusual during the year that's urgent and the school division feels a need to bring it before you, this should be the last of the year-end spending plan that you'll see.
Discussion, does anybody want to move the resolution to approve the school end-of-year spending plan?
Sure, I can move the item.
We have a motion to approve. Mr. Stevens, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, we thank our partners for their hard work and providing a surplus this year. I know that it's been a challenging year for the schools, but glad that we're able to accomplish this objective today. Thank you. We now move on to our 2023 legislative agenda discussion, and Mr. Kinsman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, what I've got before you at the dais is your draft 2023 legislative program. Today is really just sort of a check-in before I bring the one for your adoption at your next meeting, and then, of course, we'll have the legislatures come in the meeting following that. Most of this is a copy from last year. Number 1 through 1-6 are all what we had on last year's agenda. And if you want to go through those really quickly, I think the first 2 could probably be dropped off at this point. The first one was to change the school funding index. Nobody picked that up or was at all interested in that last year, and I don't know that that's going to change this year. And the same with the Hampton Peninsula Health District. I don't know that they're doing anything with that. As for 1, 3, 4, and 5, those are impact fees. The legislative programs of VML, VACO, and high growth communities and state funding, those have been sort of on every one of your agendas for many, many years. I find them all pretty helpful as we go through the General Assembly. I used your endorsement of VML, VACO to actually be able to go up there and help them out on certain things that would affect us. And then qualified immunity was something that was really very important a couple of years ago. I don't know with the current administration that is going to come about as often as it was a few years ago. And then finally, in the new category down below, these are things that I've collected from your comments over the past year. The first one was to ensure that any reduction of the grocery tax includes a permanent replacement funding for localities. I know that's a really important item for VML, VACO, and they've been working pretty hard on that, but it wouldn't hurt to have that backing them up. The second one is ensure that localities retain full zoning control over short-term rentals. You know that that's come up every year. Last year, there was a bill that would have taken a good bit of our local zoning control away. It was, I believe, tabled, but it's going to come back up again. I've been warned by VML and VACO that it's coming, and that to some degree we're the poster child for that.
Why? I don't understand why that is. We've been pretty.
So we're one of the very few that requires a full-on special use permit process for certain Airbnbs. And because we charge the same amount for every other SUP, to obtain certain Airbnb approvals that have been obtained through the county are more expensive than you would get otherwise in the Commonwealth. So some other places will have it, it's a $50 fee. For here, it's a full-on SUP, so that you're over $1,000. I have sent information to VML and VACO and showed them that I believe 40% of the locality allows Airbnbs as a matter of right. So you have Airbnb as a matter of right in the R4 district. I think it's also in the mixed use district, and it might be one other one, which is a huge amount of the county. And I've tried to explain that the only places where the board requires an SUP are in generally our older neighborhoods that don't have HOAs, and we're effectively acting as the HOA in that instance. I don't know. I mean, I've already said more words than the General Assembly is going to listen to when it comes to that argument, so I don't know how far that's going to go. But I'm just told that Airbnb lobbyists are going to come hot and heavy this year to basically remove our ability to require SUPs for it. So to the extent that we want to have that on there, I recommend putting that on our agenda. The last two, if I speak, Brad's over there, so good, I'll do the best I can. Amend the Virginia retirement system regulations to add police officers and school resource officers to the critical shortage positions list that would allow them to return from retirement without negatively affecting their VRS. And then finally, this one came in from our fire chief to support Colonial Behavior Health's effort to seek state funding to expand a building on its Merrimack campus to provide for crisis service operations. I know that those assist our police officers quite a bit in allowing our EROs to be dropped off there rather than be sort of sat with by a police officer. The data that came out of Colonial Behavior Health is that it's just getting more and more and more not popular, but used. And so this saves our police officers a whole heck of a lot of time. Our fire chief mentioned that this is probably going to be carried by one or two of our legislators, and they were looking for us to have that on there just to sort of back up. So I don't know that this would be a James City County thing. It's just more of a support. And that's the list. I'm happy to take any questions, remove notes, however you like to do it, and then I'll have it ready for you.
You think the first two, we can bag those?
I think so. I think there was no appetite for that last year, and I don't see it this year.
How about with VACO? Would VACO take those, take them on?
I know that when I had talked to, I think it was Michelle Gowdy at VML, that they've always brought up that school funding index, but it's, I tried to figure it out, and in fact, there are like presentations on the internet that
crazy.
Try to teach you how to figure out that funding, and that because of its complexity, nobody really wanted to mess with it. But I mean, I can bring it up to them again.
I would leave the two on there if nobody even takes them. If we can get VACO to move forward on those, and I definitely think our system with the SUPs for short-term rentals works. I mean, rather than go rampant and helter-skelter, I think it works very well and you know, we ought to be an example of how to do business in the state of Virginia.
I haven't looked, when I sent the information to them, I think it was last year, I believe the board had approved 75% of the SUP applications.
Yeah.
So it was one, almost a majority of our county allowed them as a matter of right, and two, you approved 75% of the ones that came before you. So I think you're right.
Yeah.
I don't think we're abusing it.
Oh, we ought to be a shining light for the state.
Maybe we should be taking a more proactive position and expecting more of the companies that do business within the state in terms of reporting to us the numbers of overnight stays and such, so that we know whether or not we are accurately collecting the revenues that are due us.
I know that community development is working, they have that program, and they're looking to check to see what Airbnbs and short-term rentals are in the county, and then we can sort of marry up those lists. And I'm sure Mr. Holt will come back to you with some information on that.
On the item of making sure that we have either the continuation of the grocery tax portion for local governments or a reliable substitute, permanent substitute. Should we also talk about the need to ensure that schools are not negatively affected by the decision to reduce the grocery sales tax on that component as well?
I
Happy
think,
to include that if that's what the board
I
wants.
think that's going to be something that the Finance Committee is talking about at VACO. But yes, you're right. That definitely needs to be there.
Because otherwise, we'll be faced with the need to find some revenue to replace that funding down the line.
All the rest we do.
So you indicate that the last two apparently are already have some sponsorship of the two ads from maybe our local.
I understand that the Colonial Behavior Health one does. I'm not sure about the
Okay.
Virginia Retirement System one.
You know, now, our officers and all can retire and go to work at Lowe's. It doesn't affect them, correct?
That's correct.
But they can't come back and help us when we're in need, and they've already been trained and know what we're doing. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You know, our officers ought to be able to, if they decide to retire, fire EMS and all, if they decide to retire and want to come back to help out a few days a week or a few days, whatever they want to do, that should not affect. They've already accomplished their career and retired. That should be set off to the side, and then ought to be looked at as far as their new position as a retired person filling in these spots. I mean, we're having a hard enough time. I just talked to a firefighter from, used to be in Richmond. Richmond in this next year has to hire 100 firefighters. They don't have enough trucks to fill 100 firefighters, but they have to fill 100 firefighting positions within the next year. They were 30 down and they got a grant for 70 and they got to hire 100. And I would much rather see our men and women that support us through their entire career be able to come back and assist us and not be penalized because they want to come back a few days a week or whatever they want to come back. That should be totally separate. That first career ought to be done when they retire. I've accomplished this. And the second should be the ability to come back in the same jurisdiction and do the same job that they were doing before to help us out when we need this. And I mean, I just think the whole thing is crazy and it penalizes our men and women that could go to Lowe's and work and make that. Why not utilize their skills back in their hometown where they belong?
I can't imagine this year that we're the only locality that's in that same position. So.
No. That's my 2 cents.
I think we're likely to see that there'll be a positive reaction to this kind of proposal, given the way in which schools have now been given authority to offer opportunities for retired teachers to come back and sports staff to come back as well without losing their retirement benefits. Just as another note on the portion where we are giving you the flexibility to get involved because of items being on organizations we're associated with, I might add HRPDC and HRTPO to those as well. They adopted legislative programs last week that were very much consensus items for the Hampton Roads region.
Okay. I think I've got what I need, unless you guys have anything more. I'll bring you the finalized one to your next meeting, and then we've already got the appointment set up with our legislators.
That's in November, correct?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Kinsman. Okay, now move on to board consideration, a contract award, $2,172,000. Oops, it's disappeared on me. Okay, I got it here. Yeah. Okay. $2,172,186 for US 60 bicycle, pedestrian, and safety improvements project. Mr. Kale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Stevens. The resolution before the board this afternoon is for the award of a construction contract for the US 60 Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Improvement Project to Henry S. Branscombe LLC in the amount of $2,172,186. This project involves bicycle, pedestrian, and drainage improvements on Richmond Road, beginning at Forge Road and ending just before Toano Middle School, for a total length of 0.48 miles, just under a half mile. Improvements include the addition of a landscape median with pedestrian refuge, sidewalk and ADA ramp improvements, crosswalks, striped bike lanes on each side of the road, and storm drainage improvements. The project addresses inadequate drainage by the installation of a parallel drainage system and additional inlets to drain existing isolated low points. Staff recommends approval of this contract, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have about it.
Well, thank you. Will that address all of this ponding that we see right before, if you're coming from Forge Road towards Toano Middle, you see massive amounts of water. Will that address that, hopefully?
Yes, ma'am. It addresses the inadequate drainage in the area by installing a parallel drainage system, which will add additional inlets and piping along the roadway. The new drainage system will include subsurface trunk line that goes down the center of Richmond Road, with new piping and drop inlets to provide improved drainage for the entire area. So yes, it will.
It's a mess right now. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions?
Can you, gosh, I'm sorry, we don't have a laser pointer. Could you show on here where Toano Middle School is?
Right,
Is
over there to the right.
Okay.
Off the map to the right upper corner.
Okay, so is there a sidewalk that we're going to be joining with here?
Yes, there is an existing sidewalk through that corridor now.
Okay.
Well, we're improving some of the areas with dilapidated sidewalks. We're also installing ADA ramps that will meet the current specifications for those.
Okay, so my question is, if you come out on to Richmond Road and you jump on this sidewalk, can you go all the way to Toano Middle School on a bicycle or walking?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great, thank you.
Now, this is not, it's on the subject, but not on the subject, but bicycles. You know, we're gonna have another bike trail in there, and they're gonna be in the road. They're not gonna be in a bike trail. And we see them running 5 and 6 and 8 abreast. And I have no problem putting in a road and adding bike trails on both sides on new projects. I think it's something the state ought to be looking at. If we're gonna have bikes on roads, we need to supply a safe route for them to be on. But, you know, and we lost that one young gentleman up at Anderson's Corner, and feel sorry for him and his family that ended up getting hit up there for riding a bicycle, and which is very sad. But I'm worried about our bikes. I'm worried about our bike trails. We put them in and all that. The bikers don't stay in it. That almost ought to be something maybe we look at in our stuff for our senators and congressmen and all, and look at going, you know, if we're going to put a road in, let's put a road in with 6 foot on each side extra for a bike trail. Any new road has a bike trail, automatic. And, you know, it'll be like some of our sidewalks connect to anything, nothing. But, you know, I see it down our back roads all the time, and these bikers are taking their lives in their own hand. And I'm sure it's going to be in the paper because we got a lot of bikers, and it's a delicate thing. But I'm worried that a dump truck or something's going to come around the corner and kill some of these people.
Do you
And
think even wider lanes are gonna solve that problem?
Well, at least it gives them a place to be. They come down some of these roads, these back roads, there's no place to go, and they eat up the entire lane. And if somebody doesn't believe it, I can video it and show you the bikers up my way that do it constantly. And I get more people worried about these bikers, and I'm getting on a tangent off of this subject. But these bikers that get out there and ride 6 and 8 abreast, take up the entire lane, and it's a double line, then if I'm gonna pass them, I've gotta break the law to pass somebody who's breaking the law, which is not how it's supposed to be. And, you know, and there's a law now, I've gotta be, I think, 3 foot away from a bike when I pass it, from my mirror to the bike. Well, if I do that, I'm riding down a middle lane and I gotta go around them. I'm breaking the law to keep from breaking the law because a bike's in the road.
Well, just look at the situation that Ms. Larson has up there by, what's that road? Green Springs? With the bike lane, Capitol Trail coming through there. Came through there recently,
Yeah.
and it was like, God, bikes coming, stop signs, you don't know where to go. So to your point, you know, bike lanes are great, but we've got to figure out how to make them work.
Yeah, and I'm not against a bike lane. I'm not against bikers. I just worry that somebody, mark my words, it's gonna happen. Somebody on these country roads is gonna kill one of these bikers. And then what are we gonna do? I mean, I think if you're gonna ride a bike, you should ride it on a road that's appropriate and has a bike lane. If it doesn't, you shouldn't be on it. And I know people love to ride bikes down through the country, but also there's people that are driving dump trucks and everything else that legally have that right on the road. I'm not saying the bikers don't legally. And I know I'm just preaching a little bit, but you know, I'm starting to get very frustrated with 6 and 8 bikes taking up one lane. And then I got to break the law to go around them, which they're already breaking the law, basically riding where they're riding, as far as I'm concerned. But that's my 2 cents, and you know, I'll always say it. So,
Thank you, Mr. Hippel.
thank you.
Now, are you suggesting that we ought to, when we're considering such projects, look at multimodal off-road trails for bicycles?
Yeah, I
or-
want them to stay safe and be able to, but you know, that's something that, you know, we ought to send up further up to Richmond is saying, you know, if we're gonna add these roads and we're gonna put new roads in, which the cost is gonna be a lot more. But if we're gonna have that many people on bikes, I'd like to keep them safe. I'd like them to enjoy the roads, enjoy themselves and all that, but I don't wanna put myself and my family in jeopardy going around a bunch of bikes. And all of a sudden now I'm in jeopardy and I'm breaking the law, going around bikes, when we ought to try to work together and look at, hey, maybe our new roads have 6 foot on each side that are dedicated to bikes, and any new road in the state starts with that. So, and it's gonna be a cost to it, but it's a
you.
new way and a new thing.
In this particular case, we've
The
submitted a
bicycle
proposal.
improvements on the, go ahead, sir.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Call, I was just going to say that in this particular case, we've submitted a proposal that includes sort of currently standard bicycle lanes, and bidding occurred with that in mind. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. This project, the bicycle improvements for this project are 5-foot wide bike lanes on either side of the road through the entire corridor of the project.
Good.
So that is part of the project.
Gives them enough room.
Are you looking for a motion to approve?
If everybody's had an opportunity to ask
I'm
what
good.
questions they have.
Well, I'd like to make that motion to approve, please.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the contract award. Mr. Stevens, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank
Okay,
you.
very good. We now move on to board requests and directives. And one thing we need to do is to designate our voting member at the VACO meeting, which will be coming up in November. And we're looking for a nomination for that. I guess I would ask if Ms. Larson, who's an officer of VACO, is going to be in attendance on that Tuesday.
I am.
Then I would nominate Ms. Larson to serve as our voting delegate at that conference.
Third it.
Third, fourth.
Fourth it. All right, you're it.
Will do.
Aye.
You didn't
With
vote,
that,
Luke.
Mr. Stevens, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye. Great. Board requests and directives. Anybody have anything they'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, I had an opportunity when I was at a Williamsburg Health Foundation panel that I participated in, with some of the nonprofits to be invited by one of the ladies from Lackey Free Clinic to come out and tour the clinic. And I had never been there before, and so it was very educational. I did not realize that about at least a third, I believe it is, of their constituents or their customers are from the Williamsburg-James City County area. Took a while to find where the clinic was because it's on down there in York County along the edge of the military reservation. But I was very impressed with it. I was very impressed with the staff and everything that was done. And I think some of the board members have probably already been there, but I would highly recommend that if you haven't been there, take the opportunity to call them up and set up a quick tour to take a look at it. I think you'd be really impressed with the operation they have, and it benefits the citizens of James City County quite significantly.
Thank you, Mr. Eisenhower. Anybody else?
I'm good.
I'm good.
I just mentioned that on Saturday I had the opportunity to go to the Williamsburg Day of Healing Race Reconciliation event, which took place outside of Ambler House. It was a beautiful day. There were a lot of very dedicated citizens who wanted to get together to talk about the process by which we could achieve racial reconciliation in the greater Williamsburg area and nationally, and appreciate the involvement of all those who attended and participated in that particular event. And with that, I'll ask County Administrator if he's got his report.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I don't have a report, just a reminder, we do have our Halloween with Heroes event at our Law Enforcement Center tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. A year ago, it was a really successful event, and so if you have an evening and want to come out and see kids interact with our law enforcement staff, I would certainly encourage you to do that tomorrow night, Wednesday the 26th at 6 o'clock.
And I understand we had a very successful event through Parks and Recreation for Halloween earlier this month.
Yeah, their Boo Bash event a couple weeks ago was about double or triple the attendance in previous years, and really a great day on the beach and a lot of participation from folks within the community. And so again, another successful event held by our county department. So it's fun to be part of those as well.
I will also mention that I received a communication from the Virginia Home Builders Association. They are working with our United States Senators on a proposal to increase funding for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for more employees to work on the consideration of proposals that involve wetlands and other areas in which the Corps of Engineers has to approve projects or evaluate their performance. They asked if we would be interested in supporting the request for additional funding for that federal program. And I guess my inclination would be to say yes, because we want to make sure that we are as efficient as possible in dealing with these things and not delay consideration. Obviously, we don't want to see any issues swept under the rug or not examined carefully, but better to have it done by an adequate staff than not. I just wondered if any board members had any reservations or concerns about that item. Okay, thank you. All right. We now have a closed session. I need a motion to enter into closed session for the code sessions. Discussion of a report or plans related to the security of any governmental facility, building, or structure, or the safety of persons using such facilities, building, or structure pursuant to Section 2.23711A19 of the Code of Virginia. Discussion of consideration for the acquisition of real property for a public purpose where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position of negotiation strategy or negotiation strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.23711A3 of the Code of Virginia and pertaining to the property along Old Town Road, and consideration of a personnel matter, the appointment of individuals to county boards and commissions pursuant to Section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia, specifically appointment to Chesapeake Bay Board and Wetlands Board. We have a motion to move
So
into closed
moved.
session. We have a motion. Mr. Stevens, just call the roll, please.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye. All right, we now James City County Board of Supervisors back to order and look for a motion to certify the closed meeting.
I certify that we only spoke about those matters that we said we would.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stevens, just call the roll, please.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler? Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. We have an appointment to make?
I'll make the appointment to change for the Chesapeake Bay and Wetlands Board. Alternate Scott May to be appointed to fill the balance of full member term vacated by Mr. Lukens effective 10 November 22 and expiring February 28th, 2027. And the appointment of Leslie Bowie to fill the balance of Mr. May's vacated alternate member term effective November 10th, 2022 and expiring on February 28th, 2027.
Okay, we have a motion. Please call the roll, Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler? Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Any other business to come before us, or I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn until 5 PM, November 8th, 2022 for the regular meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye. Meeting adjourned.